In a sermon entitled The Drum Major Instinct, Dr. Martin Luther King said in 1968, just 2 months before he died, "Yes, if you want to say I was a drum major, say I was a drum major for justice. Say I was a drum major for peace. Say I was a drum major for righteousness, and all the other shallow things will not matter." And in the same sermon, he went on to say, if you want to be important, wonderful. If you want to be recognized, wonderful. If you want to be great, wonderful. But recognize that he who is greatest among you shall be your servant. That's the new definition of greatness. And this morning, the thing I like about it, by giving that definition of greatness, it means that everybody can be great because everybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know about Plato and Aristotle to serve. You don't have to know Einstein's theory of relativity to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics and physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love, and you can be that servant. We're going to talk a little bit today about serving and service and what that means, and ask, are you called to serve? And I ask that question today because as a society, I don't hear much emphasis on service these days. Do you know it's been 40 years since the United States had a national draft? Now, for those of you that are under 55, there used to be a thing in this country called the draft, which meant that when you were 18 years of age or so, you were expected to go into military service or to join some other alternative national service like the Peace Corps. And that was just what happened to many of the men in the 20th century until the 1970s, when that was all done away with, and we now have a volunteer army. And we don't really hear much about service or volunteering as a part of our national responsibility unless, we have some really inspiring commercials about joining the armed forces, but it's all voluntary. And so we don't get a sense in culture that giving of ourselves is very important anymore. And then when I look at the business culture these days, I see that there's a lot working against that sense of giving of ourselves because our places of employment expect so much from us. I've observed that American business has figured out that if they can get 2 of you to do the work of 3, they only have to pay benefits for 2 instead of 3. And so many of you are working like 50 and 60 and 70 plus hours to do your job, and it doesn't leave much time for family time and downtime and all those other things, and to think about giving of your time. And so it gets to be one of those hard things to do, to volunteer. But I think there's one other reason that we don't feel compelled to volunteer or to serve so much these days. And Dr. Martin Luther King emphasizes that in that drum major instinct sermon that he gave. And he says that we have that instinct that we want to be served, not serve. We want to be the one out front. We want other people to serve us. My wife's sitting here today, so I can tell a story that she kids me a lot, that since I've been doing intentional interim ministry, I've served larger congregations, and she's discovered that I like it. And I like it because we have staff, because I have people. And we can do stuff together, and people do things for me, and that's nice. The first interim minister I had a personal assistant who worked for me. And I discovered that the difference between a medium-sized church and a large-sized church is if, as the senior minister, you have to know how to fix the copy machine. I don't know how to fix the copy machine here, but I've been in other churches that are smaller that I've been down there on the floor pulling that paper out and trying to figure out how to make that thing work. It's nice to be served. But Jesus knows that about us. And so he has an antidote for us. It goes like this: the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Jesus teaches us, Jesus knows that we have this drum major instinct to want to be on top and to allow others to serve, and we create pyramids of servitude where masters and slaves and all that kind of thing. So he makes it for us as followers to say, if you're going to be one of my followers, you're going to serve. And he has this idea that everybody serves and everybody is served. In Matthew 9, he says, whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Then he took a little child and put it among them, and taking it in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. And then in Matthew 18, at the time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He called the child whom he put among them and said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom. Jesus knows something about us. He knows we have this drum major instinct, and so he invites us to find ways to be more human. And the way to be more human is by helping somebody else and by serving. And so we have this problem. We have this culture that expects so much of us to work so much, where the majority is working mega hours and there's people unemployed. And we have activities with our kids and all these things going on. How do we have time to serve? And the solution that I've found is people serve when they use their spiritual gifts that bring them joy, that get them deep satisfaction. I look around this congregation and I see lots of people serving, doing lots of things. I'm not sure you're always kind of enjoying it, but but there's lots of expectations, and people just give their gifts. I saw Bob Kent out in the hall the other day, and I kept thinking, there's been times I've had to call up Bob Kent on Friday night and say, come over to the church and fix something. And he does. And that's all part of that service project. But one of the things great about a congregational church is we try to match what brings you joy to what our church does. So that's what we're going to work on a little bit today. We're going to find out what gives you deep satisfaction when you serve. And I'll give you an example. One of the churches I serve as a transitional minister was the only non-UCC church I've served. It was in the south suburbs of Chicago, community just like Montclair. People commuted to their job and those kind of things, and business people flying all over the country. But the pastor who I followed had been there for 9 years, and she came up with this formula called Worship Plus 2. And she says, our faith calls us to do 3 things. It calls us to worship, to be fed by the Spirit. It causes us to learn, and it calls us to serve. And she says, that to me, that's worship plus 2. And she said, when you're part of this congregation, we expect you to come to church regularly and then be involved in 2 things. Maybe a learning thing and a service project in the church. A learning thing, a community, something you're doing in the community. 2 service projects you're doing. She says, worship plus 2. And she'd been there long enough that people did it. And they liked it. And so there was guys who had to miss the Tuesday night Bible study when they went on a business trip. And they took their study guide with them, and they kept up with the class by doing their lesson. And there were people who couldn't volunteer for a weekly thing, so they picked something else to do. And they all did their part because they knew that to be a faithful Christian was worship plus 2. And so they did. Well, I'm going to invite us today to kind of find out what brings us joy, and to spend some time talking about what is that gives us deep satisfaction so that we can kind of go down that road of serving more. So you notice in your bulletin this morning, I'm inviting you to find another person that's beside your spouse or partner or significant other, and to talk about the question, Jesus called his followers to love God, love self, and love neighbor. Think about times when you have reached out beyond yourself to serve others. Tell your partner a story about one of those times when you felt particularly fulfilled and experienced deep satisfaction in serving. What was it about this time that was memorable or left you feeling fulfilled? What did you do? Okay, so now you got to go find somebody to do that. All right? Turn around, somebody around you, figure this out. All right, I'm going to get your attention again. And what you're going to do is you're going to find another pair that's in front of you or behind you, and you're going to reflect on your entire experience of Union Church and recall a time when the people of the church reached out to someone in the church or in the community or the world and left you feeling proud of being a member of this church. So each of you tell a time that you can think of when this church reached out and made you feel proud. Okay, so kind of take your group of two and kind of turn to two people in front of you or behind you and talk about that. All right, I'm going to get your attention just for a second. You get the idea We're talking about the joy of serving. And one of the things that I've discovered about serving is that it takes effort. This is the third congregation I've served that's had mission trips for the youth. And they're difficult to put together. The kids got to notch out time to be able to go and raise money. And the chaperones have to take some of their personal vacation time to go. And then they go off for about 10 days to serve other people. And you know what happens when they come back? They're the most energized people I've ever seen. They're full of all this energy because they've done something to make the world a better place, to help other people. That's the joy of serving, deep satisfaction. And we're going to continue our conversation after we have our closing hymn by having your group of 4 go out to the assembly room and find a table with another group of 4. And we're going to have another question for you to talk about. And there's also a survey thing for you to fill out while you're waiting. And then you can get your cup of coffee after you get your seat. But let's stand up and sing our closing hymn.